What is up, everybody? Welcome to Two Rivers Tuesday, where we talk a little bit about our Sunday message and we celebrate things that are going on in the life of Two Rivers Church. I am here with Maggie Colella, your podcast host. I am just along for the ride. She's making me do the welcome today because I made fun of her last week.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave you hanging. See
Okay.
how long you can keep going.
You want me to keep going? I can. Let me ask you hard questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Drive the car the whole time.
Let's not do that.
All right. Thanks for being here, everybody. This is our last episode for a little while.
Of the
a break
season.
for summer.
Yeah.
Last episode of the season. We'll be back this fall. But yeah, what are you looking forward to about this summer, John?
Oh, this summer, we're going camping. The Teagues are going camping.
Where
So
at?
that'll be fun. Place called Fort Mountain. It's in Georgia. I've never been, but I think there are mountains, maybe a fort, and a lake. And so I'm just looking forward to chilling out at the campsite, playing cards with the girls, and exploring, hiking, those kinds of things.
That's so fun.
I love it.
It's
Yeah.
like one tent, all five of y'all?
We're actually going to be in a camper.
Oh, that's
Yes, we're
great.
borrowing a
so
camper.
You're glamping.
Yes, I guess so. We have been glamping, actually.
That's fun.
It's I guess it's glamping.
Yes.
When you're in a camper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of.
I felt like there was some judgment and disdain in your voice when you said that.
No,
Kinda
no
like,
judgment
oh,
at all.
So you guys aren't intense, huh?
No judgment. I
Yeah.
wish we could go on a camper. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
I would totally do that.
Yeah.
What else are you looking forward to for the summer?
Oh.
Going camping.
I love the summer months because I get my summer wife, which is what we call it at the Teague house, because she works in the school system. And for all of you who are on that schedule, you know what that's like. It's pretty intense during the school year, but then you get the summer off. And my summer wife is just less stressed and present, and it's just fun to have long evenings and go for walks and enjoy that.
That's great. I
Yeah,
feel
what about you?
Everybody is a better version of themselves in the summer. I just think it's the best time of year.
Yeah. So you love summer. You choose
I love
it.
summer.
Okay.
Yep. I could have year-long summer.
Year-long summer? Okay.
But yeah, I'm excited for summer. We spend a lot of time at our neighborhood pool.
Ah, yes.
And that is so fun. My girls love to swim, and it's a great way to like hang with friends and meet our neighbors and have good conversations and stuff. So
Yeah.
It's really sweet.
Do they like to eat snacks at the pool?
Oh, yes. My girls are notorious for just walking around
Uh-huh.
the pool and asking everybody there for their snacks.
I can see that. I feel like I can picture Evelyn doing that.
Oh, yes.
For sure.
Yeah, it's a problem. Like, we have, like, pep talks every time. Like, okay, like, we have our food. You don't
Yes.
have to eat other people's food. Actually, recently, so Evelyn is just notorious for especially grabbing other people's drinks.
Oh,
So,
okay.
like, if we're ever at any type of social gathering, you will find her finding anybody's what we call sippy waters, which is just, like, seltzer waters, like LaCroix, whatever.
Yes,
What are
okay.
those actually called?
We call them fizzy waters
Yeah.
at the Teague house.
I think everybody has their own funny names for it. But she is constantly finding those of anybody else's and sipping on them. But at Cambridge Square on Saturday, we were there for live music, and she found somebody's beer.
Oh.
And thankfully, it was intercepted, but she was about to take it back.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have to keep a close eye.
Kicking back on
Yes.
Grandpa's old sippy water there. Yeah.
So we have to keep a close eye on her at the pool because some people enjoy adult beverages there, and
That's
she will just have her way with it. But yes, we're excited for summer. Another thing I'm looking forward to is we're going to do what we're calling driveway parties this summer
Okay, tell
for
me
the
about this.
women in our church and kiddos. So Katie Lockman is putting it together, and basically through Fridays throughout June and July,
Okay.
different people will be hosting a driveway party on Friday mornings, and so they get to kind of choose what it looks like.
Okay.
They can do a slip and slide, they can do games, whatever, and
Yeah.
everyone's welcome to come have fun in their driveway.
Wow. So
Yeah.
how would one find out where the driveway party is?
Yes, we will be communicating all that information. There's going to be like a document that has each of the dates and their addresses and what you need to bring to that particular driveway party.
Okay.
So I'm looking forward to those.
Oh, glad. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Better than a drive-by party.
Yes. We
Yeah.
don't want any of that. Took that a different direction.
Sorry. Can we edit that?
It's there forever.
It's good.
All right, so let's talk about Sunday. We started our Gospel Threads series. Talk to us a little bit about what the series is and why we wanted to do it.
Yeah, well, we've been working through in our life groups something called Gospel Threads, where we're just looking at our lives and the story that God's been telling in our lives and looking for evidence of the gospel there, and trying to highlight the themes of the gospel in our stories. And so we thought it would be a great idea to invite sort of our whole church family into this process by sharing some of those stories on Sunday mornings and sharing some of those gospel threads, because the reality is, I bet as we hear other people's stories, we realize some of the elements of the gospel in our own stories.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so we talked about the three main reasons that we were doing this in our life groups and while we're doing it and why we are doing it in church. And those are to see God as big, I don't even know how you say that grammatically, but we just want God to be big. Mm-hmm. And so he gets bigger in our eyes as we look back on our lives and realize all that he's done. Mm. Like, wow, God is big. And when we hear other people tell their stories, it's the same thing. Like, wow, God is so big to work in their stories in that way. So that's the first reason. The second reason is so we can get to know one another better. That really connects us when we learn one another's stories. And then the third reason is to help us have conversations with people who don't know Jesus and be able to point out like the gospel in our lives and connect that to something that is perhaps going on in their life.
Yeah, that's great. And for those of you who aren't in a life group or didn't have the opportunity to walk through this tool with your group, we have these gospel thread kind of like workbooks, so to speak, on the starting point table if you want to grab one this Sunday. And it just kind of gives you step-by-step instructions on how to process your life and how to kind of start to categorize it and start to draw out some of those themes and connect it to the gospel. So if I encourage you to pick one of those up, or even if you have already done it in your life group, I think this is just one of those things that you can continue processing.
Yeah.
Always.
Yes.
And kind of like always have eyes to see what God is doing, how you can weave that into conversation with people, and how you can grow in your understanding of who God is and the gospel. So we want to always be growing in that.
Yeah. And I learned some things just throughout this process, and I've had to think about my story and how to share it. And I talk a lot, for a living. And so I've thought about that a lot, but as I went back and thinking about it through this lens, it was very helpful to me, and to see some evidences of things in my story that I hadn't really thought about that have become threads in my throughout my life.
Yeah.
So it was really helpful.
Yeah. And I just want to give people this language, like, this is how we make an impact. That this very much connects to our mission. So our mission is that we connect people to a caring family that is being transformed by Jesus to impact the world around us. And so when we talk about making an impact, we want all of us as a church family to be making an impact in the places that God has us. And part of the way we do this is by sharing our stories and by weaving threads of the gospel into those places that God has us. And so that's what ultimately our hope and prayer is for this series, is that the Lord would use it to kind of broaden our impact and build his kingdom through our stories.
That's right.
So on Sunday, kind of the verse that we're using to kind of anchor this series is Romans 1:16, which says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes." How does that connect to Gospel Threads? Why did we want to kind of anchor us in this verse?
Well, I think thinking about how the gospel has been woven throughout our lives, it reminds us that God is really good. He's really gracious. He's been really present in our lives, and what he's done is so good. Like, there's no reason to be ashamed about it, right? Like, he's rescued us and freed us and all the other things that we could talk about in our stories, right? And so let's not be ashamed of that. There's power in that.
Yeah.
I think that's what I love about this particular verse. It's just like Paul's saying, hey, I'm not ashamed of this. This is the power of salvation.
Yes. Yeah.
for everyone. And I, like, let's key in on that, right? Like, this is for anyone. I mean, Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, this is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I remember one time kind of doing a study on this verse, and I read where that word power is like the same word, I guess, for dynamite.
Dunamis.
Okay. Oh, say that again.
Dunamis.
Yeah. Even the word is like very like powerful. So I think it's cool to think about how the gospel and our like seemingly small threads that we can weave into conversation, when they're like connecting to the gospel, that is like dynamite. Like it has the power to like explode in a good way someone into salvation and like bring them from death to life. Like that is how powerful these threads can be. It's like as powerful as dynamite. And just think about the like explosive power that it can have to be willing to weave threads of the gospel into conversation. And I just love this, for I am not ashamed of the gospel. The verse above, Paul's talking about how eager he is to share the gospel. And I just, honestly, I'm like, that is not how I feel. Like I don't have that same like eagerness. I mean, I think at times I feel that, but so often I am nervous or like afraid of it being awkward. Just so many other things that are competing for this like eagerness and boldness that I want to feel. So let's talk little bit about that. Do you have that same experience? And what do you think are some of the kind of obstacles or reasons we feel ashamed to share the gospel?
Well, I think we've bought into the culture that says like, hey, that's kind of a private thing, don't go there, and so I think that's probably had more of an impact on us than we realize. I think that I don't want to be seen as that religious guy, if I start talking about Jesus, I think that and therefore that kind of silences me, or it sort of squelches some of that eagerness. It's like I'm not ashamed of the gospel, right? And yet I don't want to come across as pushy. Maybe it's because we just really want, I probably shouldn't use the pronoun we, I'll use I maybe I just really want people to like me, and I'm afraid that if I talk about Jesus, they will be offended and they won't like me.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I feel like I really value my comfort. And so I don't want to put myself or anyone else in an uncomfortable situation. And so I am like anticipating awkwardness or discomfort. And so I just seek to avoid that. And I remember us talking months ago, you can maybe remember, maybe it was during the dangerous prayer, how like we think the possible cost and possible like bad is like worse than the possible good. And so I just think that we forget what's at stake and like what the possible harvest is, to kind of go back to last week too, like the potential for someone to go from death to life should far, far, far outweigh the possibility that I feel uncomfortable for a moment. But so often in my flesh, I weigh the possible discomfort as far greater than it actually is.
Totally agree. I think another reason isn't just necessarily that we're worried about what people think. It might also just be like, I don't know how to get there. Like, how do I make that transition? Like, so let's talk about your eternal salvation, and so I think that's part of why we're doing this Gospel Threads, is to just sort of be able to see our own story and how God met us in that. And because then we can better relate to someone and get into the gospel through our stories, and not through, like, if you were to die today, how confident are you that you would, those old, like, what they call those questions, what I'm talking about? Like,
I know
like the Kennedy questions or something like that. There was a name for them, and it was like, if you're gonna die, if you were to die tonight, how confident are you that you would go to heaven? And what are you basing your confidence in? Those are great questions to think about, but that might not always be the best route into a conversation about Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why we wanted to do this gospel threads, because I feel like sharing your story and weaving little bits of your story into conversation in a way that can kind of mirror the gospel or eventually get you to sharing bits of the gospel is so much more winsome than what we may have, the category we may have in our mind for evangelism. So like, we want this, the hope is that this is relational and conversational, and like you're being vulnerable and you're sharing some of where you've fallen short, and that makes that person feel like, oh yeah, like they're human too. They're not like preaching at me or condemning me. Like they're with me in this. I can relate to them. Like that's so much more winsome than some of what you're saying of like some of those intense, like kind of in your face questions. And so I wanted to also talk about what is kind of some of the differences between gospel threads and maybe what we would typically think of as like sharing your testimony, because I think sharing your testimony is a pretty familiar concept to people, and one that we've often maybe think through like, okay, this is how I do evangelism, and we're kind of wanting everyone to think through like shifting away from that in a sense and shifting more into this gospel threads idea. So talk a little bit about what is the difference, and we can kind of go back and forth.
Yeah. Well, I think about like, number one, like sharing your testimony probably feels like this kind of linear walk through your life, right? And it involves when you came to the realization that you needed a savior, and that's really good.
Yeah.
You know, but this gospel thread is one of the ways I think about it is you could kind of drop in at any point in your story, depending on the conversation and depending on the circumstance or the context, and be able to identify God's work or the element of His grace and forgiveness and mercy, or what He's revealed to you through that part of your circumstance and that part of your story.
Yes.
And you see that thread and how He's woven that.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah. And I think it's kind of, there is definitely overlap. So like in a testimony, you're sharing your story and you're testifying to what God has done. And we definitely want you to do that in gospel threads. Like you're sharing what God has done and you're testifying to His goodness. But it's more so a thread. So you're like taking one theme, and I think it's much more conversational. Whereas when you have in your mind, like, okay, I want to share my testimony with someone, you're kind of waiting on this perfect opportunity to give this like 15-minute presentation almost. Whereas gospel threads hopefully is more conversational, and you're kind of asking them questions and listening to them to hear for where you can kind of drop that thread in. So that's kind of some of the differences there. So let's talk a little bit more about what are some of the sensitivities or barriers we feel to sharing our story. So one thing I thought of was, I feel like some of our stories are really sensitive. So like you're being very vulnerable, and there's parts of people's stories that it's hard to share. And so I think we can also fear like, okay, well, what if I just share this really vulnerable thing and they don't respond like I want, or maybe the outcome doesn't end how I thought it would. And I was just reminding myself like, okay, I have to trust God with the harvest. Because I think we can kind of be like, okay, I'm going to work myself up and like share this, and this. And then they're just going to say like, oh, I want to be a Christian now. And it doesn't always like work that way. So I think thinking of this as like planting seeds, sowing seeds of the gospel into conversation, and that could be like years of a relationship and like years of sowing those seeds and trusting God with the harvest. Because I even recently had the experience of like being with someone and like feeling the courage to like drop a thread of something like very vulnerable, and it just was like kind of crickets, and like they didn't even give me the response I was looking for, and it was like, all right, like that's okay. And I think that's kind of, we have to have this attitude of like, regardless of their response, I'm just going to keep sowing.
Yes. You know, one of the things that Becca talked about in her story on Sunday was how they began when that revival sort of broke out in the youth group, you know, in that real pivotal moment in her life. they were finding the freedom of being honest about their hurts and their struggles, and something happened and broke out because of that honesty, right? So yes, our stories, there are sensitive parts of those that where we do feel vulnerable, but there's real power in that as well.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say that. And then the second thing I wanted to say is, we're thinking a lot about like us telling our stories. But I just want to mention that there's a lot of power in inviting someone that perhaps you've been praying for, that you would love to see come to know Jesus, to inviting them to share their story.
Yeah.
I heard someone say the other day, like, that this was like a social scientist, does a lot of research, and just was saying that in their research, they found that people love to be able to tell their story, and they just would love for anyone to be interested in their life, So you just think about that when it comes to a coworker or a neighbor, to be able to ask questions and show genuine interest in their story gives you an opportunity, I think, to be able to relate your story to theirs.
Yeah, that's good. We talk about that in core class a little bit. And when you look at Jesus's life, he asks over 300 questions. So you just see him constantly asking questions and listening. And this quote I share is that, like, being loved and being listened to are so close, like you can't even tell the difference. So if you think about the people who you feel most loved by, you probably feel very listened to by them. And so part of this is like thinking through our own gospel threads, but also being very good at listening to people's gospel threads. So talk a little bit about, like, when someone is sharing their gospel threads with you or sharing their story with you, what are some ways that you can be a good, like, receiver of that and even help them kind of navigate it?
Yeah. Well, one thing I think about is just being a good verbal listener. So I think someone just said recently about being a loud listener. I was in a conversation with somebody, and I can't remember where that was, but they were just saying, be a loud listener. And so I think just being able to kind of coach them down the field, or cheer them down the field, it's like with verbal acknowledgement of like, oh, that must have been difficult, or gosh, or, any of those kinds of things. I think just lets them know you're listening. Your body language is really important. And I think asking clarifying questions, perhaps, that they're like, wow, when they tell you about an event that happened and you say, well, how did that make you feel? Like what kind of impact did that have on you personally when that happened, or just something along those lines, asking, I think, 2 questions. If it's not coming out in the way they're telling the story, like, where was God in this? Did you have a sense that he was there in this? Or where might God have been if they're maybe not a believer, and not thinking about God in the picture, just asking them questions that might help lead into a conversation about that.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Yeah, because these gospel threads are meant to be shared with people who don't know Jesus, but also are so encouraging and build up those who do know Jesus. So, like, it's for everyone.
That's right.
And so if you are sharing, or if someone is sharing their gospel threads with you and they trust Jesus, they're a believer, I think one of the ways you can help kind of go back and forth and navigate, like, seeing the gospel in that, is by, like, thinking through, like, okay, like, and how is what you're saying, how do we see that in Jesus? Or, like, how did he perfectly fulfill that? Or, like, what is the hope we have in Jesus for that theme to, like, come fully to, like, completion and stuff like that. Just kind of having those gospel conversations with one another and helping one another see all the ways that you can even continue pulling on that thread, or how the Lord might continue using that. And then we also, in our group, just kind of tried to help each other see, like, oh, this is the type of opportunity I could see you really using that in, and helping one another in that way too. So in closing, I think we're heading into the summer months, and so we will have relational opportunities. And so I think our hope and our prayer is that you would have boldness and courage to weave these truths of the gospel into conversation. But what else? What are we hoping for people for this summer?
I think I said this last year before I went on sabbatical, but don't take a vacation from God. Like, summer is kind of like summer vacation, you're thinking about going on trips, you're traveling a lot, the kids are out of school, and there's just a sort of like a lightness to the schedule, and just don't take a break from God, and think, we'll pick him back up in the fall, at the next semester, because there's opportunities over the summer to just take advantage of those perhaps the lighter season, to have some great time with God.
Yes. Yeah. And don't take a break from your community either. So,
that's right. Stay connected.
Stay connected. Life groups kind of take a break over the summer, but that doesn't mean that you're not still part of a family. So take the initiative to reach out to people and to spend time together and to build relationships with other people. Like, one of the things I long to see more and more for our church family is, like, if you have a neighbor that you're trying to build a relationship with, invite the people in your life group in on that. Like, you need their help, and vice versa. And so we can be living on mission together and making an impact together. So look for ways to do that this summer. And then lastly, we're going to read a book together this summer. Tell us a little bit about that book and why we thought this would be a good book to read. Yeah,
this is a book called Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. He's the author of The Relentless Elimination of Hurry. Is that right?
Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Thank you, Maggie. Which I thought was a fantastic book. Yeah. I enjoy the way he writes in kind of a punchy, sort of real concise style. He has a great way of just boiling it down. And so this book is about following Jesus, and that might sound really general, but I think it might surprise us as we begin to read it, that what Jesus had in mind and maybe what our culture has in mind, they might be very different.
Yeah. I'm excited for us to read this. I think if you read this book this summer, it sets you up well to receive where we want to go as a church family in the fall.
That's right.
So we kind of thought through this as like a prerequisite for what we're trying to do in the fall. So I think it will kind of prepare your heart and get your wheels turning to receive what we want to teach through in the fall. So we're excited about that. All right, so get a copy of that. That's Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer, and we'll continue talking about it and reminding you about it and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's it for our last episode for
H.A.G.S. H.A.G.S. Have a great summer.
We should have a yearbook. That would be fun.
A yearbook.
A church yearbook. Somebody put that together so we can write H.A.G.S. in it.
I never wrote H.A.G.S. in the yearbook. I always signed in the spine. It was like, I'm the first to sign your crack. You remember doing that? No, that was
That's so funny.
Definitely an elementary boy thing.
That's great.
Sign the crack. Yeah.
That's really funny. All right, well, thanks, guys. See you later.
See ya.